The film opens on a hush that feels like a lid pressed to a pot. A line of Japanese women, clerks, orderlies, a radio operator, move in single file under a sky the color of scrubbed steel. Dust powders their sleeves. Their faces are drawn thin from weeks of transport, and their eyes travel the ground rather than the centuries. They've been told 1,000 stories about what waits behind American wire. Mockery, filth, a slow erasure of dignity. The walk from the railhead to the intake building seems to sink with every step, as if the road itself were tired of war. At the front of the line is Haruka Sato, once a ledger clerk in a coastal supply depot. Behind her, Midori Takashima, a nurse who ran out of bandages twice and hoped 3 times before capture. There's also Ayamori, a typist who can still hear the last order she took down. Burn the files, scatter, do not surrender, echoing like a moral that came too late. They expect a darkness they know. Cells, slop, a jeer turned into law. They brace for it. They are ready to shrink smaller still. What breaks the silence isn't a shout or a blow, but a set of clipped instructions delivered through an interpreter. Bathe. Then clothing issue. Then registration. The word bathe hangs in the air like a mistake. Some of the women flinch, as if the word itself could strike. The sergeant at the doorway points, not to a pen or a pit, but to a row of low bathhouses, a neat run of doors, steam feathering out in gentle threads. The breeze carries something faint and absurd. Laundry soap, not rot. Haruka glances up in disbelief. Every lesson she's learned about enemies says this must be a trick. A small bar slides into her palm, paper-wrapped, the wrapper stamped with a tiny anchor. Her fingers curl around it like a fist learning to open, and the world tilts a half-degree toward the unthinkable. They step into warmth they hadn't counted among the living. Pipes hiss softly, water runs clean. Each woman occupies a stall, and for a long moment no one moves, as if motion itself were an admission of need. Then Midori lifts the valve. Heat finds the grime in her hair and loosens it away. It finds the ship salt under her nails and dissolves it. It finds her throat and catches a sound there that might be a sob if she lets it. The little bar in her hand smells faintly of lavender and something like lemon. She works it into lather that wanders down her arms in white ribbons. She hasn't seen foam in months. Ayam stares at a mirror thumbed to the wall outside the door. A face stares back that she recognizes and doesn't. Cheekbones sharper, eyes older but still her. Not a number. Not a rumor about what happens to the enemy. When she emerges, an American corporal gestures to a table where folded garments wait. Plain cotton dresses, undershirts, stockings, even hair ties. Not parade finery. Not costumes for ridicule. Just clean. The interpreter repeats the routine in Japanese with the patience of a schoolteacher. Bath, clothing, forms. Walk, not run. Speak if you must. The women do not quite trust their legs. They keep expecting the hand that will yank, the laugh that will pin them to a wall. None arrives. A second surprise follows the first. A cup pressed into Haruka's hand at the exit, steam lifting from it in friendly curls. Coffee, someone says. She doesn't know the word, but she knows sweet. Sugar licks the back of her tongue like a memory from childhood. She feels disloyal for liking it. Is this a mask? Whispers Ayam. The bar of soap now a talisman warm from her body heat. Masks can be kinder than faces, Midori answers, and then looks ashamed of her own voice. The place is called River Oaks Processing Center, a name that sounds like a hospital instead of a prison. Beyond the gate are guard towers, yes, and wire that catches the sun in cruel little sparks. But inside the wire stand barracks with windows, a laundry shed, an infirmary with an antiseptic tang, and a broad yard dragged smooth by a rake every morning. Their shoes find level ground and don't quite trust it. A bulletin board holds a schedule in English and Japanese. Wake, roll call, breakfast, work details, free hour, lights out. The typography is neat, the translations meticulous, as if dignity can be legislated by ink. The first meal tastes like a rumor turned solid. Bread with a real crust, potatoes boiled until tender, a slice of canned peach bright enough to be a dare. Some women tuck half their portion into pockets by habit. No one comes to rip it away. Rumors travel faster than trucks. A few claim the soap will be taken back tomorrow. Others claim the baths are a test, and the real punishments will begin after the women make the mistake of believing. Haruka says nothing, not to agree, not to resist. She sits on her bunk and runs a fingertip along the paper wrapper she carefully saved. The kanji for clean in her head looks different tonight, less like a word that belongs to the lucky and more like a verb anybody could conjugate. At lights out, the barracks settle into a domestic quiet she hadn't thought possible in a place built to hold enemies. Somewhere, a clothesline complains gently in the wind. Somewhere, a kettle clicks tiredly to a stop. She lies awake with a question that leaves no room for sleep. If mercy comes from a place you were told held none, what does that make of everything else you were told? The routine, which she expected to hate because routine in wartime too often means waiting for harm, becomes a scaffold. Roll call, work assignment, lunch, inspection, the strange gift of an hour to herself with nothing to fix or fear. On laundry day, they're given basins, wooden paddles, powdered flakes in brown envelopes that scent the water with a brightness she associates with spring. Rows of women bend to their work, sleeves rolled, movements lengthening into something like grace. It isn't tenderness, Haruka thinks. It's order, and order has a shape that holds. She watches an American guard collect torn sheets with the same unremarkable focus he uses to tally spoons. No contempt, no pleasure either, just the boredom of someone whose job, today, is to make sure towels make the journey from dirty to clean. Boredom, she realizes, is its own strange luxury. If boredom exists, catastrophe is not busy. At the infirmary, Midori helps an American medic as a translator of hands. They don't share much language, but the work is fluent. She passes gauze, he nods thanks, and a prisoner with a bad cough is measured with care rather than suspicion. Midori notices a jar of white crystals, the label in English, the contents glittering under the light. Sugar. There is no mistaking it. The medic spoons it into a mug with the nonchalance of someone who hasn't measured sweetness against a ration card for years. Her throat tightens. It is not envy, not exactly. It is the shock of realizing what another world can spare. There are scenes the mind would have called propaganda if a film had shown them before capture. Black and white workers unload the same truck in blue chambray shirts, trade the same jokes, take the same break on the same step. Factory women drift through the canteen at noon with hair tucked into scarves printed with little stars. Their knuckles are nicked by tools, and their laughter is wide. A pair of children ride in the back of farmer's truck, legs banging against the tailgate, each of them biting into an apple with the wasteful joy of those who expect the next one to be there too. The women from across the ocean stare. They are surprised to find the feeling isn't only indignation or even only grief. It's also curiosity, that old animal peering out from under fear's coat. Ayam, who used to copy speeches with the neatness of a metronome, watches a girl with an oil stain on her cheek snap a wrench into a belt like a sword and wonders who wrote the rules in this country and how many were broken to make a new set. At night, arguments unfurl quietly as blankets. Nobuko Kamada, who insists on reciting the emperor's edicts under her breath in a kind of private liturgy, warns that softness is poison. They will open your hands so you forget what they were meant to hold, she says. Midori doesn't answer until the barracks lamp is turned low. Then she whispers, I remember what I was meant to hold. It was a wound that never healed. Registration means questions, and questions mean a chance to hear their names said without contempt. The clerk on the American side of the table has a pencil sharpened to a stubborn point and a habit of squinting when he concentrates. Sato, Haruka, he attempts, and when he fumbles, she corrects him. He repeats the syllables until they land less clumsily. She writes the characters for Sato on a card and slides it over. He tries to copy them, chuckling at his crooked first attempt. The moment is small and peculiar, and for a heartbeat, unarmed. No one trusts a single moment. Trust is something built from repetitions and boredom. But the board above the clerk's head lists the Geneva rules in both languages, and the lists are not a mockery. They are lived, plain as bread. Haruka uses her free hour to walk the perimeter in straight lines she finds soothing. The wire hums lightly in its staples. Beyond it, a freight line drags by with the obstinacy of industry. Flat cars loaded with lumber, then produce, then crates with painted symbols she doesn't know. America hums. America never stops humming. That hum troubles her and comforts her in equal measure, because a place with this much motion can't have paused its humanity completely for war. The first letter-writing day brings out both hunger and stubbornness. Paper is rationed, 2 sheets, envelopes stamped with a censor's box. The interpreter explains the rules. Names and health permitted, military news forbidden. Some write fiercely until the ink blots look like bruises. Others, like Nobuko, refuse the page, calling it collaboration to speak from place like this. Haruka stares at her sheet until it could be a pond or a mirror. She writes to no one in particular because everyone in particular is either gone or far. I am fed, she writes. I am clean. She pauses, startled by how complicated those simple sentences feel. She wants to add, the enemy did it. She wants to add, I do not know what to believe now. Instead, she folds what little is safe to send. The censor stamps the envelope in deliberate rhythm. The sound is almost gracious, a metronome that counts a different kind of time. I am drafts a note she will not mail. If a lie is kind and a truth is cruel, which one do we owe to ourselves? She tucks it into her pocket like a curse or a charm, undecided. Winter comes with a thin edge, but not a knife. The barracks smell of wool and soap and the coffee that never quite stops. Guards rotate. So do rumors. The Red Cross has visited. The rations are to be improved. There will be oranges at New Year. The truth is something in between and outside of all of it. Food arrives, sometimes more, sometimes less, but it never fails entirely. The women keep count without admitting that they trust the math. Midori helps set a broken finger in the infirmary. The prisoner, one of their own, a clerk who slipped on the bathhouse steps, watches her work with an embarrassment that has little to do with pain. I thought I was already broken, she says, and Midori answers before she can think better of it. We are not a single thing. In an idle hour, Ayam watches the American women again. It is not their toughness that shocks her anymore. It is their casual shared space. Men and women talking like people with jobs instead of roles cast in iron. She tries to imagine bringing that home folded in a suitcase. The thought is so absurd it's almost funny. News lives here in scraps. Danger wrapped in the brown paper of rumor. Germany has fallen. Tokyo burns. There's a weapon no one can describe. Time moves by its own logic. Long in the night, short at breakfast, forever in the queue for blankets. What changes is inside, not outside. The women have grown taller in their own posture. They stand more squarely at roll call. Not because anyone taught them to, but because the days have taught them that a back can learn memory other than the memory of bending. Nobuko rages sometimes, grief pouring out his anger because it is the only shape allowed. They are undoing us, she says. We are being unstitched. Haruka wants to answer. We were made of more than one thread to begin with. Instead, she holds her tongue and watches Nobuko grind a ration of soap into the dirt, as if it were a flag of surrender. The soap smears, then disappears. The dirt, indifferent, turns it into something else. The notice about repatriation arrives the way rain does. First as a smell, then as a darkening line on the horizon, then suddenly everywhere. The interpreter gathers them in the yard and explains, when the fighting ends, transport will be arranged by priority and capacity. There will be medical shells of silence. Those too weak will wait for strength. Those with work assignments critical to the camp will wait until replaced. The words are reasonable in the way bureaucracy often is and mercy sometimes isn't. Haruka expects joy to arrive like a tide. Instead, she feels an ache where certainty once lived. Home used to be a direction, not a question. Now, it is a door she isn't sure opens the same way as before. She pictures stepping onto a street split by bomb lines and telling a neighbor, I was clean, and hearing that sentence sound like treason. That evening, Ayam places her soap on her bunk as if preparing a photograph. She studies it. Simple, nondescript, slightly misshapen from weeks of use. She realizes it has become the memory she is most afraid of losing. The proof that even in a place designed to hold her, someone designed something to care for her too. She slips it back into the paper and ties a string around it like a promise. They turn in camp garments for travel clothes that feel like a costume for a completely different play. The quartermaster checks sizes with a tailor's efficient glance. A seam rips on a sleeve and is mended without comment in 2 minutes flat. Nobuko mutters that Americans mend as if nothing were ever meant to be permanent. Haruka thinks permanence has been the most dangerous myth of all. The last walk to the bathhouse is wordless. The women linger, palms against warm pipes, as if greeting the veins of a living creature. Midori leaves a folded note in the corner where a crack in the concrete looks like a river on a map. It says only, "We were here, and we were human." She doesn't know why she writes it or who it is for. Maybe herself. Maybe anyone who has ever feared they had to forget their own face to survive. At lights out, a hush gathers thick and tender. Someone hums a childhood tune so soft it barely exists. The night smells of clean cotton and the cold beyond the walls. Haruka doesn't sleep. She rehearses sentences no one will ask her to say and wishes briefly for more time in a place she would have sworn on the first day she never wanted at all. The truck to the port rattles like all trucks, indifferent to the human cargo it carries. The gate opens. The wire slides past. The world outside has been tantalizingly close for months, an edge they walk beside every day, and now it is under the tires. River Oaks shrinks in the mirror and condenses into a few ordinary shapes. Roofs, a tower, a yard someone will rake again tomorrow, whether she is there to watch or not. At the pier, a ship waits with its own logic of ladders and ropes. The harbor is a forest of masts and cranes and gulls that don't care who feeds them as long as something does. The Golden Gate rises at a distance like a story about human will that turned true. Haruka tips her head back to see all of it. She feels the place lodge in her like a seed that won't know what it is until spring. Ayam presses the soap against her palm one more time before stowing it deep in her bag. "What will you tell them?" she asks Midori. Midori answers without looking away from the bridge, that the world is larger than the walls we were given, and smaller than the distance between a hand and a bar of soap. Nobuko says nothing. She watches the water bruise and brighten under the shifting clouds and decides, privately, which parts of this memory will be allowed to live. The ocean is a metronome that keeps no one's time. Days lean into nights. Meals knock gently on the door of hunger and are let in. The women's talk thins and thickens, threads weaving in and out depending on seas and moods. Haruka stands at the rail sometimes and counts the nothing between sky and water. It steadies her and terrifies her. Both truths can be true. She has learned that in a place where even enemies can boil blankets. The ship's doctor checks their temperatures with a professionalism that refuses to be drama. Midori helps a girl who can't keep food down. The girl is not much younger than she is, but looks like someone who has run a marathon on cold air. "Breathe slower," Midori says. "We are not racing anyone anymore." The girl's smile is small and stubborn. "We are always racing something," she answers, and the wisdom of it lands like a feather with a pebble inside. On the fourth evening at sea, a fog horns the world into a private room. Ayam takes out her unmailed note and reads it to the gray water. She revises it only a little before tucking it back. "If the enemy teaches you anything tender, do you owe it loyalty, or do you owe it to the thing itself?" Japan's coastline appears like a raised scar across the horizon. The harbor is a chaos of necessity and grief. Cranes swinging, men shouting, carts rattling, children balanced on the edge of everything. Buildings where the war openly, gaps where houses should be, planks hammered over windows like apologies. The reception officer calls the names with a voice that has spent itself many times already. Papers change hands. Haruka's feet find a street and then another. They have never felt so heavy. People ask the questions expected of the returned. Were you harmed? Were you starved? Were you shamed? Haruka tells the truth piece by piece and watches it be disbelieved not for malice, but because it doesn't fit the groove carved for it. She says soap and sees faces go still. She says work detail and hears forced labor, in the translation like a shadow stepping onto a stage. Midori returns to a neighborhood with edges missing. She is asked to help in a clinic that's more a hope than a building. She does it. She boils instruments and tries not to count how many fewer there are. Back at a desk with paper that is too thin and ink that runs like a frightened thing, types official words while holding unofficial ones in her mouth like unswallowed seeds. Not all kindness survives customs. Nobuko's version of the story hardens like candy left out too long. The wire, the watchtowers, the humiliation anticipated so vividly it becomes memory even though it didn't happen. She tells it until it sounds right. People nod, relieved. Certainty is a soft bed, no matter how small. Haruka experiments with another kind of telling. They followed rules, she says. And the rules were kinder than ours expected them to be. Sometimes she stops there. Sometimes she adds, I didn't know what to do with that. It is possible to love one's home and admit that the world contains more homes than one. It is possible, but it is not easy and not always safe. A parcel arrives from no one in particular, a Red Cross gift with things that feel like Christmas morning in a year that forgot holidays. There's chocolate. There's a small bar of soap that looks exactly like the one she carried home and different because she is not on the wrong side of fence. She breaks the chocolate into 4 pieces and passes 3 to neighbors. The piece she eats tastes like the moment after a truth is spoken, which is to say, like fear and relief arguing softly until one holds the other's hand. The clinic where Midori works has windows repaired with sheet plastic, but the light that comes through is honest. She uses the same gestures as before capture, palm flat to forehead, fingers counting a pulse, but she knows they land different now. Order has a different flavor depending on who serves it and why. She tries to serve it with the grace she was given by strangers who were supposed to hate her. A boy limps in with a nail through his boot and embarrassment in his shoulders. I didn't see it, he says. Midori smiles because of course he didn't. Living is a series of not seeing until you do. As she pries the nail free, she thinks of the American medic and the sugar that fell into a mug like snow. She doesn't have sugar to offer this boy, but she has steady hands. Sometimes steady is enough. Writes a private account at night. Sentences stitched from pieces that don't fit in public. She calls the document River Oaks or the Country with 2 Faces, and she promises herself she will hide it well enough to be safe and poorly enough to be found someday. Years have a way of blurring their own outlines, but certain textures remain bright. Haruka marries a man who believes in schedules and in not wasting water, which make her both laugh and ache. On their first New Year together, a neighbor gifts them an orange. Haruka holds it as if it might sing. She peels it in one long coil and arranges the pieces in a little circle on a plate. You're reverent, her husband says. I am remembering, she answers, and he doesn't ask at what. She keeps the River Oaks soap wrapped in its anchor paper in a box with a ribbon she has used for 3 different purposes and 2 different holidays. Some days, she takes it out and breathes in a scent that now is more memory than lavender. She tells herself she should use it so it doesn't go to waste, and then she tells herself the waste would be to make it ordinary. Nobuko's children learn a sharp version of history, the one that will protect them in schoolyards and at festivals. Haruka's children learn a softer version that she hopes can coexist with courage. Aya marries letters to jobs and people. Midori never marries at all. Her hands are busy with a population that keeps being born whether or not the world is ready. A visitor from abroad gives a lecture at a small hall about prisoner exchanges, post-war treaties, ethics, and enforcement. He speaks careful Japanese with a professor's patience, and he says the word Geneva in a tone that suggests it is both a place and a promise. Haruka sits in the 3rd row and realizes that what seemed like personal kindnesses at River Oaks were also a structure, a law that had learned to put skin on itself. Afterwards, she lingers. The professor smiles in the tired way of people who travel too much. You were in a camp, he says gently, not as a question, but as a door. She nods. Your country followed the rules, she says, and he looks relieved for a moment and then troubled for longer. Sometimes, he answers, and sometimes we wrote better reports than realities. Haruka thinks of the soap. Sometimes is not nothing, she replies. He agrees and looks as if he might cry. So might she. On her way home, she buys a bar of local soap wrapped in cheap paper that flakes as soon as she looks at it. She bathes that night as if preparing for a ceremony and sleeps as if the ceremony did its job. When Haruka finally tells her children the whole River Oaks story, she does it on a night when the wind has found every gap in the house and is playing them like an instrument. She tells them about the first bar of soap and about the guard who didn't smirk, about the coffee she didn't know how to name, about the schedule that gave the day a spine. She tells them about Nobuko and about Midori and Ayam and the way each of them chose a slightly different shape for survival. Her daughter asks the question that wisdom always asks in child's voice. Were they good? Haruka answers the way truth answers when it's tired of being sharpened to one edge. They were people, and they were trained, and they were watched. And also, yes, some of them were kind. The rules helped. The people helped. Both are true. Her son asks if the soap smelled like the one in their kitchen. She laughs and says no, and yes, and also like a place that was not home and had no reason to be gentle, but was anyway sometimes. The story leaves the room quiet in the honorable way of rooms deciding what to do next with themselves. Ayam's hidden manuscript surfaces by accident when a niece helps her move a trunk that has been heavier than it looks for 50 years. The pages smell like old linen. The niece reads and says, "But this is not the story we were told," and Ayam answers, "It is not its enemy, either. It is its neighbor." The niece, who has grown up with neighbors that look like the world, understands faster than Ayam expects. Midori's clinic becomes a small hospital. Then it becomes a building that can stand up to weather without apology. She teaches younger nurses the same lesson the American medic didn't know he taught her. That competence is a kindness sharper than pity. When a new graduate scalds a hand sterilizing tray, Midori points to the basin and says, "Cool water, then ointment, then we go again." The girl laughs in relief at the rhythm of the words. Nobuko dies with the crispness of someone who organized her drawers. Her daughter finds bars of soap in every closet, most still wrapped. She wonders if a private ritual hid inside a public certainty. She wonders and lets the wondering be its own piety. A documentary crew comes, decades too late and exactly on time. They set up lights like small suns and ask questions that clink like spoons against a mug. Haruka sits with her back straight, hands folded, and tells the story plain. The producer wants more tears than she has left to spend in public. She offers steadiness instead. Some viewers will be disappointed. Many will be helped. She shows the camera a thin paper wrapper with an anchor on it. The paper has gone tender with years. This is not absolution, she says. This is a fact. In the edit, the sentence survives. She watches the finished film in a community hall with chairs that wobble under the upholstery. When the credits roll, someone claps the way people clap at things they aren't sure how to grade. She claps too, for the grace of trying. After the screening, a man her age approaches with the carefulness of ship docking. He served in the Pacific, not at River Oaks, but close enough to share a genealogy of ghosts. He says he is glad and sorry and everything in between. They do not exchange addresses. They exchange a bow that is almost a hug. The smell of laundry on a cold day outlasts ideologies. Haruka hangs sheets and remembers the lines behind the barracks. How they sang when the wind made instruments of them. How the white cloth turned the yard domestic against the geometry of wire. She keeps a habit she learned there, pegging each corner with a kind of care that looks like fussiness and is actually the oldest form of prayer. Her grandchildren roll their eyes at the long stories that seem to come with chores. "Oh, Bacon," they complain, "you always make history out of everything." She answers cheerfully that everything is determined to be history anyway. She is merely cooperating early. Ayam's niece finds a publisher for the manuscript, small and stubborn. The book arrives in the world without drum rolls and finds readers who needed a handhold for their complicated loyalties. Midori retires and then unretires twice because the hospital keeps calling her in for the kind of emergencies that are made mostly of fear. She brings a tin of hard candies and tells the worried to suck slowly. Sugar can be medicine when nothing else is left. On the anniversary of her arrival at River Oaks, Haruka goes to the public baths with a bar of ordinary soap and treats it like a relic anyway. She washes slowly, as if time will watch and learn. In the steam, she sees a younger self staring up at a row of stalls, skin tingling with the shock of being granted what she had prepared to live without. She wants to tell that girl, "You will never learn to prefer cruelty just to remain consistent. You will learn to add." Later at home, she opens the old Anchor Wrap bar and breathes it in. It smells less of lavender now and more of paper and the stubborn sweetness of having kept something safe. She could pass it down like a piece of jewelry, but she suspects it does its best work as a private sacrament. She closes the box and returns it to its shelf, a quiet cornerstone behind ordinary plates. On her nightstand, a clipping from the documentary's review lives like a polite guest. It says her story complicates simple pictures. She takes that as a compliment, even when it wasn't meant as one. In a small museum that once was a train depot, a new exhibit opens. Home and Away. Stories of captivity and return. There's a glass case with a bar of soap that looks like a twin to hers, but is not. Someone else's memory, someone else's anchor. The label is written in the calm voice of museum texts. Children press fingertips to the glass until the guard tuts gently. An old man asks the docent if the rules were always followed. The docent squares honesty with mercy as best she can. Often, not always. Not everywhere, not by everyone. Haruka, visiting with a friend, nods to herself. She writes the words down in her little notebook as if they were a prescription. Midori finds her reflection in a photograph from the era, a nurse bending to a patient on a narrow cot. It isn't her. The angle is wrong, the hairline different, the posture too proud. Still, she feels seen in the way of people who have stood in the same doorway, even if at different hours. The last time Haruka opens the box with the Anchor soap, she is older than she ever planned to be, and still not as old as she wishes when the soup is good and the sky performs a sunset worth applauding. She unwraps it. She holds it the way one holds a hand when there isn't anything left to say but stay. The paper is almost lace now, perforated by time. The bar is smaller than she remembers. Things often are when you've been carrying their weight. She bathes with it. At last, the lather is thin and brave. It runs down her arms like a map of all the places they've been. She thinks of River Oaks and the wire and the clock that told a different kind of truth, and of Midori and Ayam, and even of Nobuko, whose certainties protected her from something for a while. When she dries her hands, she wraps the remainder in a fresh piece of paper cut from a grocery bag. The Anchor wrapper she tucks between the pages of a book she reads every winter, where it will press flat and turn into a bookmark that knows more than the story it keeps. At the edge of sleep that night, Haruka revises old sentences the way people mend old clothes. They treated us like humans, she thinks, and changes it to, they were required to, and they did, and sometimes they did more, and that mattered. She edits another, we were enemies, into, we were called enemies by people who would never meet us, and we met anyway. The wind climbs the eaves. The house answers with the little talk of settling wood. She feels steadied by the unremarkable physics of it. Rules wood, wire, water. Some things are honest about what they can and can't do. Soap can't end wars. It can insist that bodies deserve gentleness, even when flags disagree. That insistence can leak into places it isn't expected to, and do small work that lasts a long time. She falls asleep thinking, not of battles, not of bridges, but of a clothesline thrumming its thin music in a yard that tried, briefly, to be a household. When she goes, years later, her children sort her things with the care of those who understand that every object is a sentence half-written. They find the grocery bag wrapper, the museum ticket stub, the lecture program about Geneva, the notebook with tidy lines. They read the words, "not always," often, and nod because the phrase maps well onto their lives, too. At the funeral, Iam's niece tells the River Oaks story lightly, as if placing a hand on a sleeping shoulder. Midori sits in the front row with her palms pressed together the way she does before washing up. The room smells faintly of flowers and of the clean wool of winter coats. Someone mentions the documentary. Someone else murmurs that they saw it twice. A teenager, bored and curious, looks it up on a phone under the pew. After the last bow, Midori walks home slower than the city requires and faster than grief would recommend. At the bath that night, she says Haruka's name under her breath, then Nobuko's, then Iam's, and lets the water remind her that the body is the only nation we all carry. We remember wars the way calendars do, by dates and blasts and names printed bold. But the quieter ledger matters, too. A hot pipe humming, a rules poster read aloud with care, a bar of soap pressed into a trembling hand, not as absolution, not as propaganda, but as a plain thing given because a rule said to and a person agreed. River Oaks was not paradise. It was a place that surprised cruelty with competence and sometimes added kindness for free. If you stand in a laundry yard on a windy day, you can still hear the music of lines singing work into grace. If you look at your own hands when they are washing another's, you can count the distance between propaganda and practice on your own knuckles. And if you find, one day, that the world has handed you a small, ordinary mercy from a direction you were taught to fear, you can let it teach you something about what you owe to facts, to rules, and to people. That is the story Haruka Sato lived into, shared with Midori Takashima, argued by Nobuko Kamada, written by Ayamori, and the reason a simple bar of soap belongs beside the big histories. It is not the whole truth. It is a true piece, and sometimes a piece this small is the part you can hold. The camp ledger turns up in a county archive, misfiled under supplies, miscellaneous. A volunteer retires and decides to make order out of dust. He finds the entries, neat as stitches: soap, 48 bars, sugar, 9 pounds, towels laundered, 112, broken basin replaced, 1. Names appear in a faint second column: Sato, Takashima, Mori, written by an orderly who must have liked to know where things went. The volunteer circles the surnames with a dull pencil and wonders who they belong to, then writes a note to the museum director. People in the numbers. When the ledger joins the exhibit, Haruka's granddaughter, Keiko, reads it aloud as if reciting prayers. Soap, 48 bars, she repeats and looks at her mother, who nods with a quietness that holds an ocean. Midori, invited to speak at the opening, surprises herself by thanking the tyranny of paperwork. The audience laughs, and she smiles, then grows serious. Paper kept count, she says. Sometimes it counted dignity. Iam's publisher sends a small royalty check and a letter full of compliments in hesitant Japanese. Iam laughs softly at the amount and keeps the letter. We were paid in attention, she says to her niece. That is more than we expected when we put our names under the weight of history. A letter surfaces in an attic in Modesto, California. Brown envelope, Army stationery, the handwriting tight as a drumhead. It is from a young corporal who worked the intake line at River Oaks. He writes to his sister in Kansas, 1944. We are told to follow the convention and do it like the book. It's a funny thing, Ruth, doing the decent thing by orders. But I reckon doing it by orders is better than not doing it at all. Gave a girl a bar of soap today. She held it like it could run away. Guess I would have too. Keiko reads the photocopy sent by the museum and feels the strange warmth of 2 times touching fingers. She brings it to Haruka's house. Haruka runs a thumb along the soldier's words as if checking the seam. He was right, she says. Rules stood us up. People added what they could. Midori remembers that medic spoon and the small drift of white. Systems, she says to Keiko, are the bones. Kindness is muscle. Both are how a body moves. Keiko writes the sentence on her phone, then copies it into a notebook because some words should live in more than one house. A school invites the three women to sit in folding chairs on a stage with curtains that smell like chalk and ink. The students are too young to have learned suspicion as a second language. They ask clean questions that snip to the core. "Did you forgive him?" a boy asks, the courage of it round in his face. Haruka answers the way honest things answer. Some of them needed forgiveness, some of them didn't. "I spent more time forgiving the ideas that taught us to hate one another and the people who fed those ideas into us like supper." A girl with braid ribbons asks Midori if nursing an enemy felt different from nursing a friend. Midori says, "A wound has its own flag, and I don't salute it. I clean it." The room exhales as if someone cracked a window. Ayam tells them about writing 2 letters, one to send, one to keep, and the way the unsent truth can hold your hand in the dark. The teachers write those lines down as if they had been waiting for them. Afterward, a boy lingers with a bar of hotel soap he stole from a family trip. He holds it out to Haruka as if offering shared language. "For your museum," he says. Haruka presses it back into his palm. "For your pocket," she answers. "So you remember that ordinary can be holy." Keiko proposes a pilgrimage none of them thought they needed. Return to California and stand where the steam once lifted. Airfare is dear, logistics fussy, but they build a little fund from friends and readers and a city grant that prefers reconciliation to statues. The museum in River Oaks, now a civic center with a plaque, opens its doors. The old bathhouse is gone. The footprint is there, marked by edging stones and the memory of hot pipes humming. They walk the perimeter like women measuring fabric. Haruka stops where the laundry yard once stretched and closes her eyes. The wind obliges with a brief song on a nearby clothesline, a suburban echo. Ayam kneels, presses her palm to the dirt, and says, "We outlive the wire." Midori hides a wrapped candy under a bush the way nurses stash small comforts in impossible days. "For a stranger who needs sugar," she whispers. At a community potluck that evening, a gray-haired man stands and says his father worked the guard tower. He reads aloud a diary entry about boredom and about a woman who thanked him for not sneering. "He thought she was being clever," the son says. "I think she was being exact." They visit the bridge that framed their exit. The Golden Gate keeps its habits, cars and ribbons, fog offering and rescinding its veil. Haruka stands with both hands on the railing. "So big," Keiko says. "The idea had to be as big as the steel," Haruka answers, thinking of all the ideas that have been small and mean and successful, and how fragile big ideas can be when the wind changes. Ayam buys a postcard and writes a note to herself she will never mail. "You survived, and then you learned how to live." Midori watches a group of teenagers take pictures in a braid of languages and feels a tide of relief that the future has room for so many vowels. They ride a bus past blocks that were shipyards and are now coffee houses, past a warehouse wall painted with a mural of women in scarves. "There," Midori says, pointing the way one points out a distant mountain. Keiko records a short video, not for the internet, just for the family's soft archive. Later, she will watch it when the news feels like a knife and remember that once, in a war, someone boiled blankets and made a bed for an enemy. Back in Japan, the city council wants to create a small remembrance garden behind the library. River stones, a bench, a plaque with fewer nouns and more verbs. They ask the women to choose the words. Committees are tempted by monuments that chisel certainty into granite. The three resist gently. "Let it invite," Ayam tells the planner. "Not insist." The plaque finally reads, "Vaish, mend, feed, listen, follow rules that protect. Add kindness when you can. Children climb on the bench and make it a ship. Elders drift and sit." The garden learns how to hold silence and chatter at once. A young father reads the plaque aloud to his daughter. She repeats "listen" twice, as if trying the verb on to see if it fits. Nobuko's daughter visits and stands a long time without speaking. When she does, her voice is not as sharp as her mother's had been. "She protected us with simple versions," she says to Haruka. "I think we can stand a complicated one now." Haruka nods, grateful for the soft inheritance. Iam's book is assigned in a university course on ethics. A debate blooms in the lecture hall like a weather system. Is goodness that arrives by command less good? Does kindness in a machine vindicate the machine or indict the world that made it necessary? An older professor reads from the corporal's letter and calls it the morality of compliance, then shrugs and says he'd prefer that to the immorality of impulse. A student who has cleaned his grandfather's grave every year argues that ritual is a container for meaning, not a substitute. Another student, whose family crossed oceans twice, says rules are a kind of bridge when rivers run rough. Iam is invited to speak and declines. She sends a note instead. I am honored you are arguing in daylight about what we decided in the dark. Please keep arguing. Do not let certainty make you lazy. The department chair writes back that her line will be framed in the seminar room. She smiles, uncertain whether frames help or hinder. Frames can hold. Frames can trap. She hopes the students keep a screwdriver handy. Midori trains a final cohort of nurses before retiring for the third and last time. She teaches triage and sterilization and the difference between pity and presence, between speed and hurry. On the last day, she opens a box and places on the table a small sachet of sugar, a folded bandage, a copy of the Geneva Rules in both languages, and a bar of soap wrapped in paper with no anchors, bought at the corner shop. These are the tools I carry no matter the ward, she says. Sugar for the frightened, bandage for the broken, rules for the powerful, soap for everyone. The class laughs with that wet edge that means someone may cry. A nurse with a stubborn cowlick asks if she believes the world is kinder now. Midori answers like a nurse. The fever breaks and returns. We keep cooling the brow. They applaud too loudly for the room and then usher her to tea, where she sits while everyone tells her stories about themselves, which is how gratitude often works when it's shy. Haruka dreams sometimes that she is back in the intake line. Except this time, she is the one handing out the bars. There is a ledger. There is the stamp. There are names she pronounces carefully, tasting each syllable like fruit. In the dream, no one is certain who is the enemy. The line includes men, women, children, and old soldiers from too many wars. The bathhouse doors are infinite. She wakes with her hands curled into the shape of giving. The posture lingers. Keiko suggests recording the oral histories properly. Microphones, transcripts, a website with enough white space to breathe. Make it boring to ruin, she jokes. They find a volunteer who knows how to place commas where breath belongs. Haruka's voice on the recording is steadier than she expected, softer than she hears it in her own head. When she stumbles, she leaves the stumble in. To prove I was human, she insists. The editor agrees, grateful for the instruction. Late one night, listening through headphones, Keiko hears Haruka say, "We left straighter than we arrived," and pauses the file to let the sentence rest. The garden behind the library grows moss the way old truths grow acceptance, slowly, then all at once. Rain smooths the edges of the stones. The benches wood darkens and glows after storms. Children invent a game called Geneva without knowing exactly what the word means. They take turns making rules that protect the smallest player, then add a kindness that wasn't required and cheer as if they'd won something measurable. A ceremony marks 10 years since the plaque went in. The mayor speaks briefly, wisely, and sits. A choir sings something with a melody old enough to have been borrowed many times. Midori reads a list of verbs: wash, mend, feed, listen, and the audience repeats each one back to her, a call and response that warms the evening. Iam takes the anchor wrapper from her bag and holds it up for a moment, then tucks it away again. She doesn't need to show it. She just needs to know it's there. Haruka squeezes her hand. We did our small work, Haruka says, and the small work did the rest.